to sort my stuff. Trying to get a good angle here. This is a tough room to see everybody. Karen just gave you one of the options in our ongoing Do Something Month. My fancy vestment here, my t-shirt, my work shirt from a previous year of God's Work Our Hands. Sunfire is doing a month of this as opposed to just today. Today is the actual day. We're doing a little better, or at least differently. But the point here is doing something for others. Our gospel today is from Luke chapter 15. So now all the tax collectors and sinners were coming near to listen to him. And the Pharisees and the scribes were grumbling and saying, "This fellow welcomes sinners and eats with them." So he told them this parable. "Which one of you, having 100 sheep and losing one of them, does not leave the 99 in the wilderness and go after the one that is lost until he finds it? When he's found it, he lays it on his shoulders and rejoices. And when he comes home, he calls together his friends and neighbors, saying to them, 'Rejoice with me, for I have found my sheep that was lost.' Just so I tell you, there will be more joy in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous persons who need no repentance. Or that woman having 10 silver coins, if she loses one of them, does not light a lamp, sweep the floor, and search carefully until she finds it. When she has found it, she calls together her friends and neighbors, saying, 'Rejoice with me, for I have found the coin that I had lost.' Just so, I tell you, there is joy in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner who repents." The gospel of the Lord. Thanks be to God. When we hear this text, I'm fairly certain that the word that you hear first when you think about it is lost. At least that's how it works for me. And I just want to point out that in our language, in our lexicon, we have certain pairs that we are used to. There's in and out, up and down, lost and, like how I cued that with a rhyming word. You're good. We expect if something is lost that it will be found. But the trick is not to lose it in the first place. How many of you are the finder in your household? You know who I mean. Yeah. How many of you are the loser in your household? I mean this in the kindest sense, because I'm a loser. I know darn well where it was. I know where I last saw it, and it should still be there, because that's where I last saw it. And when I go there and it's not there, I got to call in the finder. Because I know where it's supposed to be, and that's where I look. And I call in the finder who doesn't know where it's supposed to be, and she lights the lamp and sweeps and carries on until, lo and behold, honey, it's over here. Thanks, dear. What would we do? But that's what happens when you only look where it's supposed to be. And losing things is a problem, especially when it's the car keys on a Sunday morning. Yeah, it happened. The finder found it in time. I got to St. Paul on time, but losing things is one thing. losing people is another. My previous life, for a lot of my previous life, for 30 years of my previous life, one of my extra jobs, well, extra or not, it was just assumed that I would do it, was to help take anywhere from 150 to 200 of my closest 8th grade friends. I was the teacher. I use the word friends in quotes because some of them might not have agreed with that word. To Washington, D.C. It's a ritual rite of passage in a lot of schools. And I was one of those people who every year had that privilege of making that trip. And for most of those years, like starting the second one, I had 40 students and their chaperones, everyone on my coach, for whom I was responsible. I had to keep track of them. And some of those chaperones, let me tell you, made a 13-year-old look stable. So I had the whole bunch, but I also had 8 of those were my personal responsibility because I was also a chaperone. Do you know how quickly you can count to 8? When you take a bunch of kids from farm country, many of whom have not been more than 50 miles away from home, to a city, any city, I don't care which one, but particularly a crazy city where people drive like nuts, and where you have them standing beside the metro saying, no, back up, the train is coming, things like that. You're going, train? You can count to 8 really quickly. And I had to, because it's amazing how quickly 1, 2, or 3 of those 8 13-year-old boys could disappear. And you could usually assume that they were going to be near a clump of 13-year-old girls, but not always. If they were there, I didn't mind so much. It's when they disappeared completely. But you can count to 8 very quickly. And you can do it several times a minute in some cases. This was very good training for the years later when my wife and I would travel and go shopping and just live life with 6 kids. Now, you can count to 6 more quickly. You don't count as often, usually because you have better control of where they are. But even then, there were many times when you hit 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Usually not a problem. Now, just like my sheep up there, kids can disappear for different reasons. The first time I remember this happening to me, I only had 2 kids to keep track of. But we were in a store in suburban Chicago, and the 3-year-old disappeared. I'm not comfortable with this because I don't know the store. And finally, I find her standing in the middle of one of those rounder displays because it was just a cool place to hang out. It was kind of fun in there. It's kind of like that sheep who said, ooh, grass. I think I'll follow the grass. There's no malicious intent. Just kind of like. Another parallel to the lost child in a rounder, the next time I lost a child in a rounder was quite a few years later. We were up to 6 kids, and we went out of the store and went 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Megan! It was usually Megan. We all go back into the store. Megan, where are you? Megan. And Megan goes, ta-da! And spreads the clothing on the rounder going, I'm so funny. No, you're not. No, not funny. All right, now, that was not malicious, but it was deliberate. we're just big kids. Sometimes we just kind of wander off. Sometimes we deliberately say, ah. But either way, it's very easy for us to get lost. To get lost physically, or lost emotionally, lost spiritually. And sometimes we do it accidentally. It just happens, or it happens to us. But sometimes we do it deliberately. We make choices and say, I don't like that. I'm not going to do that. I don't need to see those people. Things like that. But however it happens, when we can get lost, just wrapped up in the fear and the anger that surrounds us in this world that we live in, we can get lost, separated from families and friends because of a damaged relationship or a poor choice that just we haven't resolved yet. We can get lost in our own greed and our own temptation to do what we want. We can get lost from our connections to our faith, to our church, to our God. However it happens, whenever it happens, anytime it happens, being lost is scary. Even when we don't recognize it, it's scary. Being alone causes fear at some level. It can bring us down. It can lead to depression, all kinds of things. Well, as I mentioned, today's text, we hear lost. Jesus talks about a lost sheep and a lost coin, but it's a lot more than that. Some of it is how not to get lost. Some of it is how they got lost in the first place. But we hear that the Pharisees were grumbling because Jesus was welcoming sinners and tax collectors. I don't know. Why do we separate those? Anyway. But the Greek here is prosdekome, and the root for that is dekome, which literally means to embrace and draw in. So this wasn't just a, hey, welcome, it's good to see you. This was, Jesus is embracing and drawing in these sinners, these tax collectors, these least, last, lost, unacceptable people. And it says he's telling this story to them. Doesn't say who them is. Well, them is both groups. I can assure you, each group heard these stories very differently, depending on whether or not they were the I am fine, I'm doing just okay, those people are lost, or you are the lost, the one who's been cut out. But when we hear the story, in the first story, Jesus talks about a sheep and says, who wouldn't leave the 99 and go find the one? And the word where he left the 99 in Greek is eremo, which isn't just out in the open. It's in the desert or wilderness, a dangerous place. A dangerous place to leave them. But notice, he left the group. They had support. They had one another. They were together to go look for the one who was lost, the one who was at more risk, the one who needed to be back in the group, who needed to be in that relationship in order to be safe. Because that's what this means. Relationship means searching out a community, searching out connection, communal bonds somehow that are so hard to maintain in our world today. One of the reasons that God's Work Our Hands began was when Churchwide said, you know, we do this stuff. Everybody does this stuff. But what if we picked a day to put a point on it? To remind those doing the stuff and those who are the recipients of those acts that this is what God's people are doing. Let's call attention to it. Let's lift it up. Make it visible one day. Well, as I said, we're doing it better here. We're going to do it for a month. Overachievers, I tell you. So in this text, Jesus is talking about creating relationships and community with the sheep. The other story is something is lost in darkness. Are we sometimes in a dark situation? And I liked how this inanimate object wasn't where she last saw it. I identify with that. But she didn't have a finder. So she had to light the light. She had to go looking where it shouldn't be in order to bring unity, to bring a solution. Now, we don't know that the sheep was just following the grass, but it seems logical to me. The coins roll. But loss, no matter a thing or a person, loss is hurtful at some level. When we find ourselves separated or lost, when we are the one lost, it hurts. Those times when we see someone else who's separated from the community, from us, it can be hurtful. No matter how it happens, whether it's just by accident, the child playing hide and seek in the rounder, or deliberate, when we have said, enough. I'm just enough. And there are lots of reasons that can happen. 34 years ago, I mentioned that the first time I lost a kid in a rounder, I only had 2 kids. Well, 34 years ago, my first wife and I had a 4-year-old and a 10-day-old baby. And I was the music minister at church, and I had gone back to church Sunday afternoon for a meeting. I got called out of that meeting. It was not a good reason. Later that evening, when my pastors came to see me, it was not a good meeting, because I was at that point where I felt like God had kicked me, and kicked me hard, and I was pissed. I was really, really angry. And I shared that liberally with my pastors. Because when you hurt and you can't just not dealing, that's what happens. I'm going to tell you right now that I will not just magically appear in your life without a sense of invitation. Part of it's because of that night. On the other hand, I beg you, if you need to make the invitation, you should have the number. And even though Verizon occasionally fails to connect to my call, the voicemail always works, and I get a ding. So the point of this exercise was the only thing that got me back. You notice I'm standing here. Apparently God and I got on better terms. Yeah, the funny thing is he didn't move anywhere. So I guess I did. But I didn't do it alone. I did it with a community. That body, that church family doing dokomai, embracing and drawing me back in. And it was a process, I assure you. That's what we do as this body. We do it for ourselves because sooner or later, we're all the one lost one way or another. Sooner or later, something happens. It just does. That's life. So whether you're the lost or the one lighting the lamp, we're all God's children. And you notice that in this story, the sheep and the coin are in what we call passive voice. The active voice in the story is the searcher. And in our lives, we are the searchers, except when we are the lost. But there is one searcher for whom we work. Whether we're the ones who were lost and afraid, or the ones who are seeking to embrace and draw in and comfort the one who is lost and afraid, we're doing it because God is always searching for you, for me, for us. Always searching. Whatever crack or crevice we're in, whatever sofa we fell down the crack of, if we're a coin, he's searching because he loves us and he wants us to feel found. He wants us to feel there, embraced in God's love. Amen. And we sing.